Welcome back to Communicology. Today I'd like to finish off a series dealing with the television and how it's been a part of our history over the past 100 or so years. And I want to focus on the current and future of television and where it is and where it may go. And it's one of those things that's kind of weird to think about because, frankly, when you talk about television, do you watch television? Most of us think about the idea of watching a television, but do we watch television? It's kind of like when I ask my students, how many of you read a newspaper? And no hands go up anymore, but they still read news. They just get it in a different way. It just comes on their phone. So the idea that they no longer read the news is a misnomer because they still do. It's just a different medium. Now, the flip of that, though, is the television, because it's still the same medium. It's still the same piece of technology. It's just how it's used is what's changed. So the idea of watching television is kind of floating along and moving away from what we do and how we use it. So today I want to focus on three basic things, and that's the idea of the initial downfall of the television by what's known as the second screen. Then I also want to talk about the television as a monitor. And then the last thing I want to talk about is how there are no cultural TV moments anymore. So let's dig into those three things. Now, the first thing, of course, is the idea of the second screen. And what I mean by the second screen is, and you'll be familiar with this right away whenever you think about your own television viewing habits or what you sometimes see at the movie theater. So you've got the main screen that is going on, whether it's the television or the movie screen, and people pull out a second screen, the phone. And all of a sudden you have a big change in the way that people interact with things. So instead of watching what's happening on the screen, the movie screen or the television screen, we're focusing on what's on our device in front of us. And we'll look up every once in a while when there's something like impactful, like a big piece of dialogue or some noise. And we'll think that we're actually watching television, and we might tell people that we were watching television, but the truth is we weren't. We were watching our phones, listening to television. And of course, if you ever listen to television by itself, it's really confusing. It doesn't make sense. So that makes it, a kind of an odd medium and an odd format. So the thing that really gets us going and thinking about it is, again, when you start thinking about how television changes because of the second screen phenomenon, it's not uncommon for a lot of Netflix TV shows and others to absolutely change the way television is done to make up for the second screen phenomenon. In fact, this was recently divulged, on a Joe Rogan podcast when he was talking with Ben Affleck and Matt Damon about how television is done now. And they both mentioned how television is written to where they're telling you the plot. They're telling you plot devices. They're telling you the story. They're telling you the theme in the dialogue of the writing, which is really weird because usually the number one rule of screenwriting is to show, don't tell. Because you have to assume your audience is smart, so don't tell them. Just show them and unfold it before their eyes. Well, if they're not watching, how can you unfold it? And the other thing, too, is it's not uncommon where they will tell you things that are very basic to what they're doing. Like, I am grabbing my mouse now. I have my mouse. I am going to click my mouse. I am going to grab a remote control. Here's the remote control. And it's like, what are you doing? So if you're watching TV and you see that kind of thing going on, and you're like, why would he say something that I can see you're doing? It's because they're writing for the second screen. And it's a weird phenomenon. So if you're someone who's used to watching television or watching movies, it makes no sense because I can see you picked up the mouse. Why would you have to tell me that? I can see you grabbed the remote control. Why would you have to tell me that? It's for the people who are busy scrolling. And they'll tell you plot devices. I think we need to do this next. Good plan. And they start doing it and they're like, okay, I think we need to do this next. Okay, good plan. And they tell you what's happening so I don't have to look up. And it's mind-boggling. But again, the reason why they do it is because people aren't paying attention. When my kids were growing up, we had a rule in the big SUV that we had with one of the DVD players in the back that you weren't allowed to watch movies unless I had already seen it. Because I'm only driving down the road, and if I hear noise from the movie, I want to at least have an idea in my brain what's going on. Well, if we're watching Star Wars, fine, I've seen that a ton of times. If we're watching an Avengers movie, fine, I've seen that too. First time we ever broke that, they wanted to watch the Transformers movie. So we watched Transformers. And, well, they watched Transformers. I drove the truck. And while I'm driving, it's just a cacophony of noise. So you have explosions and all this mechanical sounds going on, and I have no idea what's going on. I have no idea if good guys are winning, bad guys are winning. I don't know if they're just cruising around or if they're fighting. It's just noise. And it makes no sense. And then to top it all off in typical Michael Bay fashion, there's tons of explosions and stuff. No clue. There's dialogue going on. No idea who's saying it. It's just one of those things that it doesn't make any sense. Well, that's the second screen world, though, is that instead of me trying to focus on driving, people are focusing on their phones. And there's all kinds of noise and chaos and explosions, and it's at that point noise. So I want to have, the creator of the product wants you to watch the screen, but the problem is that we watch this second screen instead. And so you can see how that would start with the demise of television, because it's no longer the number one thing I'm watching. This is number one. This is second place. So ergo, if we're going to get you to keep watching, we have to keep feeding you reasons to keep it on. So they turn it almost into basically classic radio theater. So where you used to sit in front of the radio and listen to, Little Orphan Annie or Lone Ranger or whatever. Now it's that point where we're telling you everything that's going on. So it's just like that again. So the other thing that comes along very tightly related to this is the idea of television as monitor. What I mean by a monitor is, like you think of your monitor on your desk for your computer, and you're feeding the computer stuff into the monitor, and the monitor, all it serves is just a dumb system that just plays back things for you. So it's not like worried about receiving terrestrial signals from like the TV towers. It's only just receiving the signal from the wire or the Wi-Fi, and it's just a playback device. That's all it is to watch things on. So as a result, you have this situation where the TV is just simply working as a monitor. So the idea of us watching television, it's very much like I was talking about the kids reading news. I mean, they don't read a newspaper, they read news on their phones. Well, the TV used to be a TV, and now the TV is no longer a TV. It's just a monitor. It's just a matter of what I'm pumping into it. So I'll hook up my computer to it, or I'll hook up the Wi-Fi into it. I'll stream this. I'll play a DVD here or a video game there, and I'm just pumping data to it, and it just serves as a monitor. Again, the idea of the thing how much that changes in your psyche, the idea of, quote, watching TV. So I want to have a television. I want to turn on the television, but why are you turning on the television? It's not that, I need to catch the latest episode of Seinfeld, Friends, whatever the TV show would happen to be. It's no longer there. It's no longer important because it's just whatever I want to pump into it. So if I'm putting in a streaming service into it, I will watch whatever movie I want whenever I want. If I'm watching a TV show, I'll find that on the streaming service, and instead of catching it and watching it when it's on, I'll just watch it whenever I want, and I'll watch as many episodes as I want, or I'll pause it and whatever I want to do. And it just serves as a chunk of computer that basically is just projecting whatever I'm pumping into it, and it just changes the inherent idea and the thought of gathering around the television like we would do as a family to watch the latest show. Now this ties in very much to the last point I wanted to make. And that's the idea of the television as, a driver almost of cultural moments. So you think of like the old days of, hanging out at the office, and you'd bump into people at the water cooler or around their cube, and we would say things like, "Did you catch the game last night? Did you watch this show? Did you watch that?" kind of thing. And those moments are fairly well long gone because we watch a lot of it like on our phone, or we watch it on a computer, or we just catch it later and stream it later or whatever. And it's no longer like this big thing, like you have to see it. So as I talked about in the golden era video, you had to catch the show the first time, because if you missed it, it's gone forever. There's no such thing as a rerun. There's no such thing as syndication. introduce syndication and rerun, and then maybe in the future there's a decent chance I'll get to see it again sometime in a few years or so. And even things with movies, eventually movies would come off the big screen and go onto its little brother television at some point, and you'd have to wait a few years, because it would go from the movie and they'd be off for a while, and they would show up on the the VHS market and then or the DVD market, and then it would come off for a while, and they would have the sales market for whenever you would be able to buy the DVD or buy the videotape, and then finally it would then show up on television, and it would be highly edited, because if it's going to be on TV, most likely it's going to be one on the big three networks, ABC, CBS, NBC. So they're going to edit it heavily for television. Now, of course, they had cable like HBO or Cinemax, that of course you would catch it, unedited there. But even if it moved on to other cable channels like, say like a TNT or a TBS or a Turner Classic Movies or something like that, you would be able to see it mostly intact. Sometimes there'd be stuff edited out for it still, but it would definitely be pumped full of commercials and things like that. But again, you'd have these watershed moments where it'd be important to be around your television. And then the big part of this would be the hit television shows. Because again, if you got 3 TV channels, 4 if you had a PBS, but typically your big 3, you're going to be watching one of 3 shows. So even if everyone was evenly split, 33% of the country is watching this, 33 is watching this, 33 is watching this. So when you go to school the next day or work the next day and talk about, did you catch the show? No, I watched this other one. And then so you found the third of the people who did watch it, and you can kind of hang out and talk with them about it. And it wasn't that big of a deal. But think how hyper-fragmented things are now. It's all over the place. As far as when things are available and what's available, there's 150 channels, and you can pick and choose whatever you want and whenever you want. So you don't have these seminal moments of, here is a hit TV show. This TV show is going to run X amount of years. Now, remember we talked about the idea of how television works and how the system is created as far as like pilot TV shows, and then they do a short order, and then they do a full season order and a second season order. And again, that system is long gone too, as I mentioned in that video, because no longer do you have all of these pilots that are figured out. They just tend to, in the last decade especially, like we have this message we want to push. We're just going to find a TV show and make it the message carrier. So that's what they do. Instead of trying out all these pilots for what the people want, they figure we're going to force the message and we're going to use this carrier to do it. And so as a result, you end up having this problem of a lack of variety of television shows that are coming out. And then you don't have these big cultural moments about these TV shows, because it's not about what we want. It's about what Hollywood wants to force upon you. So you're going to watch it whether you like it or not. And most people just say, no, actually I'm not, and they just turn it off. But in old TV shows, you'd have your choice. And then in the pilot system, the old TV shows that no one liked would die off fairly quickly. Maybe we watched the pilot and that was it. Or we might watch the short order and then quit watching. And then the ones that stayed around, those are the ones that had the legs, and then we talked about them even more. So you'd have your long-running hit TV shows. So I talked about things like MASH, or you have Dallas, or Dynasty, or Young and the Restless, if you want to do a soap opera. Of course, you've got action TV shows like Dukes of Hazzard and A-Team and Knight Rider, and then you start moving into other TV shows like sitcoms like Friends or Seinfeld, and then some other dramas like Law and Order. So these things that like have real legs that people tend to rally around and watch, and they'd have huge numbers because, again, you get your 3 primary channels. Yeah, there's other cable stuff, but those shows were so important that people didn't care so much about the cable draw. They were stuck to one of those 3 networks watching the show, and it became an important thing to be a cultural driver. So, because culture exists because it's a way that we do things, the way I define culture, way of life, so it's the way of living and how people get together. So that when you go into work on the next day, people are going to ask, did you watch fill in the blank, whatever the TV show was? Or, oh my goodness, could you believe what happened on that TV show? And if you didn't see it, what are you going to do? Go sit back at your cube and, hang out by yourself and cry because you missed out on the show. So there's a lot of societal pressure to watch the show, but also because the shows were so well curated that people wanted to watch them. So it's not like there's just like you have to see it like a bandwagon appeal, like you must get on this thing and pay attention to it. It was more like no, but I really want to see it. I mean, that's a good show. So that was a very common thing. So no matter whether it was a comedy or a drama or a procedural or whatever it happened to be, we wanted to see those shows. So we tuned into that kind of thing. I mean, now the only thing it does that now are sporting events, and usually large ones. So did you see the game last night? Isn't typically like any game. It's usually big games, a playoff game of some sort. Other than that, like, whatever. There are so many sports and so many things that are broadcast on so many different channels. Did you see the game could be a bunch of different things. And there's so many different sports that go on at any given time. You're just flooded with this stuff. So it doesn't have the same cultural moment. But, as I had mentioned in a previous video, the idea of that cultural moment, like whenever like the TV show MASH ended after 11 years, so much of the country tuned in to see how that show was going to get wrapped up. And it still to this day remains the highest rated, most watched television episode, ever. And it's never going to be touched because there aren't TV shows or situations like that where people just cannot wait to watch this show. And people would flock, to televisions. You take the phone off the hook back when you could do that kind of a thing, remember? Take the phone off the hook and we're just gathering around and we're going to watch the TV show together as a family. And then the next day it's like, did you see it? And then if you're watching this channel, you'd find your people. And did you see the show? Wow, I couldn't believe it happened. And then the next thing that happened, and it was such a big phenomenon. I mean, people who are old enough, like my age and older especially, will remember the Who Shot JR phenomenon from Dallas. I mean, that was a cultural craze. I mean, like that had so many people talking for months. And we couldn't wait to tune in when the new season started in the fall to see what happened. Who shot JR? Those cultural moments are gone, and they're gone forever. And it's a sad thing to think about because they're not going to come back. Because look at the television industry now. It's decimated. I mean, if I ask my students, how many of you watch television? They'll all raise their hands because they're thinking I'm watching something on a monitor. But realistically, how many are watching something terrestrial? You're something that's pumped out through a tower like ABC, CBS, NBC, or even if it's pumped out through cable, that's fine too. But looking at your primary networks, your ABC, NBC, CBS, those things, how many of you are watching those things? Nearly none of them. They might all flock to something that's streaming, like with Netflix and Stranger Things or with Squid Games. But again, those are short-lived, and they only run a few seasons, and then they disappear, and we never talk about them again because again it's released. A lot of times they either release them weekly or all at once, which is the binge model. You just release everything at once and you just binge watch all of it, and it's a huge spike of discussion and then fades off real fast. Whereas the weekly ones come and go. But the way television is, remember last time we talked about the idea we'd have an order of the whole season. And back then, a season was 22 episodes long. Now it's like 8 or 6. And then instead of waiting 3 months for the new season to start, you're waiting 2 or 3 years for the next season to start. So they're doing like 6 to 8 episodes. Then it's off for 2 years. And then it comes back for another 6 or 8. And then off for 2 or 3 years. I mean, it loses all that momentum, all the cultural currency, and it just disappears. So all that we have left is, oh yeah, I remember watching that 2 years ago. And it's hard to get hyped to get back into it again because you were really hyped and then it died. And 8 seasons isn't necessarily enough to get you really hooked anyway, to get us really discussing it. You watch something, invest into it for 22 episodes over the course of a season. I mean, that's a hook. So it's almost to the point, like when it happens, like 1 week they're off and it's going to be a rerun, and you're like, oh man, we've seen this one, and you can't wait to see the next episode after episode after episode. Those are gone. I mean, there's no 22 episode seasonal hook, and then wait 3 months and then 22 more, and then wait 3 months and then 22 more. Those are gone. That model is gone. It's probably never going to return. And we're stuck with what we currently have. So again, with all the different channels and all the different streaming options, it's no longer you just have a basic cable package and you watch your shows. You might have Hulu, but you might not have Netflix, or you might have Netflix but not, this other one, and this other one, and this other one. You just, it's a mess now trying to figure out what to have. So it's a weird thing what the future holds for television. We really truly don't know. Will we go back to a more of a cable system again, because we started to have these little streamers now and then, but now we have so many, and by the time you buy all of them, you're paying what you were paying for cable. So it seems a little bit silly to have all these different streaming options. And a lot of stuff that they dump out that's exclusive to the streaming options aren't even necessarily that good. Really, there's nothing worth buying on. There's no real good reason to have Disney, other than it's just a storehouse for all the Marvel movies and Star Wars movies and Disney movies. So if you wanted to avoid having a DVD collection, you'd have a Disney account. I mean, that's the only reason why it exists, because it's not like they're pumping out really good, new, fresh content all the time. At least Netflix has the occasional new movie, and Amazon has the occasional new movie, but they're so pumped full of the message, that you don't really want to watch them anyway, because it's the same thing. They're going to gender swap, race swap, for some kind of cultural messaging in your face, when all you want to do is just watch a TV show. So it's hard to get drawn into the compelling shows today, and it doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon. So where does that leave us? Well, that leaves us as frustrated consumers who are continually turning to, well, frankly, YouTube. In other places, the people that watch YouTube is sky high. There are just insane amounts of hours that are dumped into YouTube every day, and people consume it every day, just like shows like this or any other show that you might watch, that any creator would put together. And we just find ourselves gravitating towards those things because, well, it's content, it's entertaining, it's informative, it's what I want. And I don't have to go through this, that, or the other thing. And if I want someone who delivers this kind of message or that kind of message, I can just find that creator and just stick with that person, and it works. So that's where we are. That's probably where we're going to be for a while. So think about those things next time people talk about television and did you watch the show last night, and ask yourself, when was the last time you even heard that question? But that's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you didn't like what you heard, that's okay. Thanks for tuning in anyway, but I'll see you next time on Communicology.